was in there. Oh, you didn't go.
Oh no, I knew that to be conference before coming.
Bad day? Tell me about it, break. You can tell me, I mean, if you want to.
I have a habitat homeowner that's really messy.
I'm sorry, that is rough.
She had a really bad experience with her house, but I mean, the house was and I said everything. And now
Hello. This is Deputy Mayor, or Ms. Deputy Mayor. Please around here, so anytime you want to start.
Okay. Good evening. I think I'll go ahead and call the budget meeting to order. It is 6 o'clock, so those of you who are here, if you take your seats, and we'll go ahead and get started. I note before that you do have the minutes, or you should all have the minutes attached to look at, and at some point, whether we do it now or at least before we leave, it might be a good idea to go ahead and approve those minutes. I don't know if you've had a chance to look them over, if anybody's ready to do that at this point in time. Well, let's go ahead and move on. So I will turn it over to Mr. Colson to go to the budget staff so that we can go through the next phase of our budgeting process.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. The objective today is to initiate this meeting with a review of any open items or questions that may exist pertaining to the general fund. And upon that, we will conclude the general fund discussion and provide direction going forward. And then we will spend some time. We have several funds, as we've talked a lot about, and there are some that are I think vital that we talk about and understand what the 2015 recommendation looks like and get some input from you. And by the end of the day, we anticipate that the budget meetings would be concluding, and then we would wrap up the budget session on January 15th with a affirmative
I hope
action.
you mean July 15th,
July 15th.
and not January 15th.
It's a J. So thank you, Deputy Mayor, for the correction there. So at this point, I'd like to, with your permission, turn it over to Mr. Gerber. And I believe that today, both Nikki and Doug will be driving the vote here.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Colson, Deputy Mayor. As Mr. Colson indicated, the goal for this particular agenda item, number 3, is to wrap up the general fund and get good direction going forward on that. As the council governing body knows, we started this process with an overview of significant expenditures increases, significant expenditure decreases, significant revenue impacts. All those were contained on page 8, and as you know, we spent a good deal of that first Saturday going through all those lines. At the next meeting, we dove into some particular line items in the budget. We have, since that time, also responded to some council questions and provided that information to you. So at this point, we would stand ready to answer any other questions, comments, or follow-ups that you have regarding the general fund budget.
Okay, does anyone have any questions? And I don't know if you noted the fact that the questions that had been submitted have been answered, and those are passed out. Did you already say that? I don't want to repeat it if you did say that.
I did, but I'm often too succinct, so it perhaps
Yeah,
got
the questions
missed,
are in
so.
front of us. They're online too, but if anybody has any additional questions, now's the time. Yes, Mrs. Schwartz.
Thank you, Madam Chair. One of the questions that I submitted was from a constituent, and I was talking to Nikki earlier, and I'd kind of like that one explained about the savings. I think it's question number 8.
I can respond to that. And just so you know, and any member of the public knows, the responses to these questions are available on the budget website, so anybody can see both questions that you all submitted and also our responses. I think you're referring to the Parks and Recreation question. That's on page 4, if you all are looking for it. And the question is related to the transfer of the city's Parks and Recreation Department, and it mentioned a little bit about how we would have a declining payment to the county for the cost of transferring the Parks and Recreation operations over. And the question is that it acknowledged that there was a savings from 14 going into 15 of about $1 million less that we'd be paying the county. So the question was about what happened to those dollars. The literal answer is that in the budget book, there's a page for the Parks and Recreation Department, which eventually will go away once we no longer have any payments to them. And that's where those savings are. There's a line item in there that's a transfer to the county, and that's where the $1 million less is. What happened to that savings is essentially it was absorbed by some of the obligated cost increases that the city had to make in the 2015 general fund budget. So really that's kind of where that $1 million was, is it was absorbed by some of the costs which we lay out, which were increases to our budget.
Is there any other? And if I could, I note that you, at the bottom of the answer, talk about the fact that we still carry the debt, which I think is important, because that means we still have a cost to the city that we are paying with that debt service.
That is true, thank you.
Any other questions? Judge, did you?
Did anyone make a point?
Yes.
Okay.
Mrs. Swartz, then Mr. Smith.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And then on page 8, that I guess that was what I had, page 8 in mind. On the motor fuels budget, there was a decrease of like 130,000 or 123,470. Was that taking into consideration that gas prices are going up? I mean, what is the savings that we have 123,000?
The way that we budget motor fuel is department by department. They all look at both their estimated price and the estimated cost of fuel. So this is probably a combination of looking at both usage and projecting the cost. And for the past couple of years, you know, in the recent history, costs have gone up and down quite a bit. So even if you look at our actuals, we've had several years where costs have spiked both up and down. And looking at all of those years where costs have varied, we're very comfortable that our usage is going down. So even with the costs increasing, our departments felt comfortable coming in with a lower budget there.
Mr. Schmidt?
Yeah, this isn't really a question. This is more for the council about something that's not included in the general fund that was included in the past, which is the grant funding for the downtown facade program, which last year was removed from the budget, passed on to JADO, which then JADO then took that out as well. And I just wanted to put in a call for some consideration of that, given the nature of what's going on downtown right now, and everyone here's desire to see that program succeed downtown. I think it's important that we show a real commitment. The city has made a commitment to the infrastructure, but the commitment that the city has made is not to any of the proposed parks or any of the bells and whistles. It's to the infrastructure that needed to be done anyway. We're paying money that needed to be done anyway. We've had a $2.5 million commitment from the business community towards improving our downtown, which is going to be an economic driver, which is going to be a cultural gathering place for our city. And I think it's important that the city show some sort of a measure of support for that also. So I would ask that we consider putting some of that money back in, or if anybody has other suggestions for ways to fund that program, I would be happy to hear them.
Yes, Ms. De La Lisa.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I concur with your concern for the downtown redevelopment project, and most importantly, the fact that working with the Facade program has, I think it has a 3-to-1 investment value, return on investment, I think it was.
10 to 1 is
10 to
actually
1,
what they've
thank you.
gotten.
I know it was a rather large number. However, I strongly, after being in the JADO meetings last year and being part of the committee, one of the presentations that we had stated that economic development, one of the largest parts of economic development is supporting your small businesses. And I would hope then that because this is part of economic development in the downtown area, that hopefully the JADO board would have serious consideration for this year. I wholeheartedly believe that the program should be funded because in the end, it's just money that stays in our community. And like you stated, thank you for the correction, it is 10 to 1 reinvestment. But this is an economic development fund. And I would strongly encourage the JADO board members to take a look at it as that, and not only to fund it, but to fund it well. I know that at one point in time, the program was receiving $375,000 for grant funding. All of those funds were always being exhausted, and those funds have given us great buildings downtown, like the Gizmo building and other establishments that we've had. But I would strongly suggest to the JADO body and for those members that are here from that group to consider not only an allocation, but an allocation in excess of $500,000 with that budget.
Any other, Mr. Coulson?
Oh, thank you, Deputy Mayor. I would, I'm heartened to hear that. I think that funding source was a challenge last year. From a budget perspective, we do have some surplus that's built into this number, and it has proven to be an effective program. By way of recommendation, I would ask that maybe you consider identifying an amount of money. I'll just throw out $100,000 that could be used for that funding source, but continue that conversation with JADO and maybe look at a larger amount that could really be used all the way along Kansas Avenue, including Noto and going all the way down to the Heartland Park and the area that we're trying to do there, look at a facade program there. So I think that's a little bit more aggressive, and I think what Councilmember De La Isla was talking about, more aggressive economic development programming.
Yes, Stanley.
So, Mr. City Manager, you're saying that there is a surplus in our budget of $100,000 that would not impact the budget at this time with no mill levy increase that we would have available for this fund?
Deputy Mayor and Councilmember De La Isla, there is in the budget that is presented to you, we had about a $300,000 surplus that was there at the beginning of the conversations. A decision was made last week pertaining to the Youth and Social Services, which identified about $78,000 of funding that would be used, and so that reduced that number to about $220,000. I believe they might have actual numbers. And so at this point, there is still within the structural balanced budget some room to make this decision. But I would, and sorry for being somewhat pedantic, but I would say that even if we did this, I think we need to have a plan to go back to JADO and talk about a larger, more comprehensive program addressing all of the Kansas Avenue.
Mr. Schmidt?
I would agree with that. I like the idea of expanding it. My major concern is that last year we, as we were beginning construction downtown, we, for the first time in I think 8 years, failed to fund that. So yes, as a backstop, I would propose, I guess this could be a motion to add $150,000 towards a downtown facade program with the expectation that we continue to pursue an expanded program through JADO.
Okay, there's a motion, and Ms. De La Isla seconds. Any further comment or question? Yes, Mr. Manspeaker?
I wouldn't say we failed in not getting in the budget last year. My concern is that if I'm looking around the city of Topeka and I'm thinking of where best to spend $100,000 in terms of who it impacts and how it changes their life, Kansas Avenue is not the bright spot to me where I want to put these dollars. this community has lots of other concerns that I think are much, much more important than the development and the corporate bailout of folks on Kansas Avenue. So the reality from my perspective is this is a bad move, and this tells the community that we have $100,000 to throw away on something that's not that important.
Just in response to Mr. Manspeaker, the term corporate bailout would indicate that the organizations that are being funded by this grant are in failure. And the way that the program operates is that it gives small town, small business entrepreneurs the opportunity to establish a business and rehabilitate the facades of our downtown. I would hope that if there is a question with regards to what the program and what the impact that it has in the community, again, it has a 10-to-1 return on investment to our community. It helps us with tax because the more sales that we have in that area, the better it is because it's gonna augment our sales tax receipts. In addition to that, it will also increase the value of the properties in downtown that are maybe sitting empty because there is no funds for redevelopment of that, which then in turn would also increase our receipts of property taxes for that area. I understand your concern, but I also think that that is a prime opportunity for us to start providing support to people that would like to, the smaller person that wants to start a business, to have an incentive to go to that area of our community.
If I may.
Let me go to the mayor. He's had his hand up. Mr. Mayor.
Yeah, I agree and support this. And just adding to what has just been said, typically, many of these have indicated they would not be able to make the move to reestablish downtown if they didn't have some type of support. Usually they have to make a match, or sometimes much more than a match, because they have so many requests. They can be, the committees who make the decision on who is funded can raise the bar pretty high. And those that need it the most and have the match are those that receive it. So it really is something that makes a substantial difference to these local businesses when they are getting established. And it was set up through the downtown DTI is the ones who have a organization that makes the decision on the grants. They have a grant program, and this is actually a grant that the businesses have to apply for and have all the appropriate documentation in order to receive the funds. Yeah, that's it.
Mr. Manspeaker?
Thank you. I appreciate the education on what a corporate bailout is. My concern is not for the business owners downtown or the business owners that wish to move downtown. My concern is for the business owners that don't exist downtown. And as I know it, a corporate bailout in my mind is that any business has a balance sheet. If that balance sheet isn't such that you can afford to fix up a property or renovate a property, but you can still be successful, then why should you have a better advantage than another business owner in another part of our community? Why should business owners on 17th and Randolph have any less of an advantage than somebody who's downtown? I mean, the reality is that the free market should reign in private business. When the government steps in and starts giving handouts, then those corporations become reliant upon those handouts to be successful. And I think it creates a false bottom and a reality that we can't live in. We have to be successful and it has to be sustainable. Thank you.
Yes, Mrs. Hiller.
And to just chime in on this discussion, one of the beauties of the way this program was structured, in my opinion, it was not a subsidy to the business. It was a subsidy to the structures downtown. Again, we as a community identified that we felt that, and some years ago, but that has continued, that downtown was critically important. Those are older structures. We're now doing our city, the infrastructure work that as a city we're responsible for by deteriorating facades. Some of those owners have plumbing and drainage issues that need to be structurally addressed in those buildings that you just wouldn't find in a newer building in another part of town. And so this program certainly does support small businesses, but it is structured the way it was in the past, that the application is what you would do with your building, and it is a permanent improvement that stays with the building. So we've progressively invested in downtown as the time has passed, and if this is passed again, assuming it's set up the way it was before, it will be an investment in the downtown buildings and structures. And I would support it. Thank you.
Yes, Mr. Smith?
Yes, I agree that I don't want this to be a corporate handout or a corporate bailout, and I don't think it is. It's a means to attract businesses to an area that we've identified as an economic incubator and as an economic stimulator in the future. I would have no problem with doing this anywhere else in town. If anywhere else in town wants to come up with $2.5 million of private contributions that they're giving directly to public for publicly accessible and publicly available services, I would have no problem matching that with a $150,000 grant program in those areas either. This isn't a bailout. They could take any of that $2.5 million and fund this themselves. This is a signal of support from the city and from the community that we agree with those efforts in improving downtown and in making downtown the economic engine that it could be. And that's why I support this. Thank you.
Any further comment? Yes, Mrs.
Thank you,
Schmidt.
Madam Chair.
Mrs. Swartz?
I too support this because I think any capital city that I've been to, they have a vibrant downtown. We have to consider the downtown area of any city, the center of the city. And even though my district is out on the southwest side of the city, I hear from my constituents that they think we need a vibrant downtown too.
Okay, any other questions or comments? All those in favor of the motion, raise their hand. Opposed? Did you get that, or were we too quick? I wasn't counting.
I think that's 7 in favor,
And
2
two
against,
opposed.
so
Okay,
the
so
motion
that
would
would pass.
pass.
All right, back to our budget team. Or unless there are any other questions on the general fund at this stage of the game. Yes. Mrs. Swartz.
One last question. Hearing from constituents, one of the discussions has been, is there any thought of consolidation of some of the departments, whether it's IT, HR? I know we've had a lot of looking at consolidation, but I didn't know if those were ongoing discussions and if that would be considered in the future with the county.
Deputy,
Sorry, yes.
would you like me to answer?
Yes, please do.
All right, so, Deputy Mayor and Councilmember Schwartz. So officially, no. Unofficially, probably no. There's always, and really what I'm saying, as we look at ways that we do business, and it's not really just even with the county, it's with other entities out there. We're always looking ways that we can increase efficiencies. In terms of a specific consolidation, I don't think that would be something that would even be within our purview to look at, but we're always looking for efficiencies and how we can work closer with other organizations. I know the consolidation question is one that has been around this community for a long time, and I'm sure it's going to be around going forward, but I do believe that would probably be more of a political entity having that conversation as opposed to us. Our focus is to provide the highest level of service to this community and achieve the most efficiency in resource allocation.
Thank you.
Mr. Mayor?
Yes, did you announce the vote as 7-2?
I did.
Okay, I do not have a vote. I did not vote. I thought 2, 4, 6,
I thought
8.
you did. You
No.
do have a vote. You vote on the budget. So legal decided long ago that you would be able to vote on various.
Is ex officio on the budget committee.
Oh, well, that's right. So you don't have a vote.
I don't
on
have a
budget
vote
committee.
here. I do when it comes before the council.
That's right.
But not on this committee.
You can make motions in council meetings, but you're
But
right,
not-
you are ex officio. I apologize.
So it will be, the vote
So then
should be.
it's 6-2.
6-2.
All right, that's noted.
I apologize to Mr. Swartz. The mayor was bringing that up to me when you were asking your question, which is why I was,
That's fine.
but I know your question got answered at this point in time. But is there any other comments or questions? Mr. Gerber?
So Deputy Mayor, I believe that concludes the discussion and recommendation pertaining to the general fund budget. What we're requesting, and based on the conversation that occurred, is we'd like to have a vote of this body to put that general fund recommendation to the body as a whole as part of the budget going forward.
Does anyone, okay, so what you're asking for is that we go ahead and tentatively approve by motion the portion that's the general fund to recommend to the council. So do I have a motion? Yes, Ms. De La Isla. Do I have a second?
With a question.
Okay, good. What's your question?
You're saying the general fund as presented with the 2 alterations that we've made thus far in total? Then yes, I would second that.
Okay. And of course, it's still, if that recommendation passes here, it still comes to the council for adoption. But is there any comments or questions? Mrs. Hiller?
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. Yeah, the only comment I would have is that I'm a little, if that's what the body wants to do, we can move forward with that tentative or committee recommendation. I'm a little uncomfortable doing it before we've talked about the funds, as there is interaction and interrelationship between all the funds and the general fund, and I don't see a reason to rush, but it's a tentative recommendations.
We can go ahead and take a vote now, or wait till the end of the evening when we finish both funds, if that's the body's preference. Okay. Could we hold the motion, or could I ask the people who've made the motion?
I would be happy to rescind my motion.
Okay. At this point in time, can we do that? Withdraw the motions?
Yes, you can withdraw the motion.
And we had consent of the second to withdraw the motion. And then we'll revisit that issue after we've had the presentation on the other funds. All right. I'll turn it back over to Mr. Gerber.
I believe the next item on your agenda was number 4, and with your permission, Deputy Mayor, and with the permission of the body, we'd like to move that back so it directly precedes the enterprise fund discussion. We think those coincide together, and it'll help us as part of our discussion to be able to illustrate some points within those funds.
Seeing no objection, we're just going to go ahead and talk about the health fund first and then move to the others.
Yes, thank you.
Proceed.
Deputy Mayor and Governing Body, if you can open up to page 130 in your budget books. What we're doing is walking you through any of our major funds that have what we saw as significant changes in the 15 budget, and the health fund is one that we felt like would be very helpful to walk through and point out some of the changes that we're recommending in the 2015 budget. Okay, so what you see there, this is the entire health fund budget, starting with revenues going down to expenditures. On the revenue side, what that is that's the cost of the premium for our health care that both the city pays, so that's labeled employee here, and also the employees pay. Those are all revenues that go into this fund to help pay for our health care costs. And what you'll see here is overall a little bit of a revenue decrease. What's driving this is that we're changing the way that we're charging basically ourselves. So the employer will now be charged for employees based on what those employers are enrolled in versus a flat amount. A little bit of a history there is for the past couple of years, regardless of what plan employees were enrolled in, a flat amount was charged to whatever fund or whatever department they were in. And as going in general in our budget, we're trying to go more and more towards actuals. If we have information, know what everybody's enrolled in, and can be more accurate, we want to do that wherever possible. So what this is reflecting is that it's resulting in a little bit of a decrease because, for example, an employee enrolled in a single plan, that actually costs less than the flat amount that we were charging before. So it results in a net, a little bit of a less of a revenue into the fund. But we were very comfortable making that change this year, knowing that we're sitting on a pretty healthy cash fund balance this year. So just a change that we're making on the revenue side there.
Is there any questions? I don't see any. Yeah, Mrs. Hiller.
I'm sorry, I'm just trying to keep up. So is what you're talking about the $25 a month surcharge that people had this year?
Not only $25, but the whole cost of the premium equivalent.
So we're looking at the premiums themselves going down this year, or for 2015?
Not the premium themselves, but the cost that we're charging our own internal departments for the health care for their employees.
Yeah, I was gonna say, Mr. Gerber, or else, I think I understood what you were saying is this is not what the employees were being charged. This is what we were charging departments because estimates were being done as opposed to using actuals. And Mr. Gerber, you can probably do it better than me.
That's accurate. Prior budgets, we charged every employee on the plan to their department $6,400. So whether it was me on a family plan or somebody who I don't know who would be on a single plan, we were each charged via our department $6,400. Now we're doing that on an actual cost basis. So it
Of the type
reflects
of
the
plan.
fact that my family plan is more expensive than a single plan.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions? I would just say, I'm happy to see that, because I think when, every time we're looking at actuals, we're getting much more accurate numbers for what's in the fund, and so I appreciate that you have made that change.
Okay, moving on to the expenditure side, I just want to point out some of the major variances or changes that you'll see in the fund. And overall, any changes that you're seeing for the most part are related to a proposed comprehensive wellness program. So I'll walk through how that wellness program is reflected in the budget. On the personnel side, you'll see some dollars there for the cost of half of an employee. And what that is that is making what's currently a half-time wellness coordinator position in the Human Resources Department a full-time position. So essentially that position will be paid half out of the general fund and half out of the health fund. The next big change that you'll see in the 15 budget over the 14 is you'll see $75,000 under individual and contractual services there. What that is that's an estimate of the contractual cost for hiring somebody to run our comprehensive wellness program. We're proposing that the wellness program will not start until later in the year in 15, so this is just part of the year's costs. We'll have the full impact of this cost come the 2016 year, and this cost will be a more definite cost once we go out to actually find whatever vendor or whatever service that is. So for now, this is giving you a snapshot of what that dollar amount could be.
Questions? Yes, Mrs. Schwartz.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Nikki, this 35,000, where was that, where did you get that number?
Oh, sorry, do you mean the 75,000?
No, the 35 is for the contractual services. Or is it 75?
Yeah,
Yeah.
sorry, it's a little dark.
Oh, okay. How did you get that number?
What we did is we took an estimate of about $300,000, which was based on just a couple of examples from other cities and places that we've heard that have had comprehensive programs, and simply took a fourth of that number because that's what might impact us in the 15 year.
And this is the decision then not to do this in-house. I mean, it would be, even though we had a full-time FTE, that it would not be doing the program in-house.
I think a very important point to make is that just because you're committing to these dollars at this point doesn't mean you're committing to exactly how the program is going to be run. I don't know if all of the options have completely been weighed at this point, so just because this is in the line item budget doesn't mean that's the amount we're necessarily going to spend or have to spend, so certainly we'll look at all of the options. But what we need when we're presenting a budget is expenditure authority to give us flexibility for if that does end up being the best option, it gives us authority to be able to spend those dollars.
Okay.
Mr. Mayor?
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. And I understand this is also working into the labor contracts, something that's being considered. I would like, could someone just give us a little background and how and where this is coming along and what the meaning of it is for all employees?
Deputy Mayor,
Yes.
I'll do my best to answer that question. This is one of those times where I have to give an answer that I'm not, that I don't like to give, and that is, we don't totally know all of the details. I hate to sit here and say that, but it's, you know, that's just where it is. There's a lot of details to be worked out. But in terms of background specific to your question, Mr. Mayor, basically, we entered into a cost-sharing discussion with the unions as a group, and that began earlier in this year and concluded approximately a month ago. And as part of that cost-sharing agreement, one of the things that was discussed at length was an overarching wellness strategy, which included a number of components, including, you know, wellness, healthier, happier employees, addressing premium cost for both the city and our employees, as well as a potential clinic piece that also emerged as a key discussion point. Both groups have agreed that that is a direction that we want to proceed and explore more thoroughly, and so that's where it's at right now.
Okay, well, and I think this is important, and it's the appropriate direction to go, because the things I've seen, and now with parts of the Affordable Care Act where there is almost like reimbursement to organizations that have the type of wellness programs, what I see, they do make a difference with the employees and health care costs that go down.
Yes, Mrs. Schwartz.
Thank you. I'd like to bring the council a little bit up to speed because I'm on the Wellness Committee, and I had a lot of reservations about the approach that we were taking. But Friday we went up to Olathe, and we learned that the contract that Olathe has, they also work with Salina, Pittsburgh, Olathe, Garden City, and the KU Endowment. And also Overland Park has a wellness program that they're instituting with clinics and with the programs with a contractor that has the expertise to know how to do this. So getting this information and sitting down with the, I guess it was the HR director at Olathe, it was very educational. And her comment at one point was for every $1 they invest, they get about $9 on the return because they're saving so much money with the contract of the risk assessment and then actually having personal coaching to go along with those assessments. And it's not just about fitness, it's about testing and getting to those illnesses and situations that force our premiums way high. And so I was very enlightened and very encouraged by the visit and finding out that we're not, some other cities are doing this way before Topeka has even started to consider it. And I hope that we pursue that. It was definitely discussed as to doing this in-house, and the idea was that there's vendors and experts out there that can do this better than hiring a full-time person to run a clinic and that type of thing. So I am much more encouraged after the visit on Friday.
Thank you. Is there any other, Mr. Colson?
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. I think there's some things that we do really well within this organization. I think the provision of health care and wellness for our employees is not one of them. And I know that this is a conversation that many of us have individually had, and certainly it is a prime topic of conversation that I have with our employee base. And we believe, as Mr. Gerber states, there's a lot of things that we don't know yet. We have a goal. Our goal is fairly simple. We want to improve the quality of health care and wellness for the employees. We want to reduce our costs in the long term. And if you take a look at the trajectory of healthcare costs that impact an organization like ours and private sector organizations, it is scary and it is big, and they become budget busters. So while we would love to sit here today and even as part of this budget process to give you all the answers, we don't think that we can do that. So what we're really seeking at this particular point is direction from you and a placeholder within the budget that allows us to do the preliminary steps. And we will come back, very quickly so that we can outline a program to proceed.
Okay. Is there any other questions? Mrs. Hiller?
I have three right here in this budget. One would be, and I realize it's preliminary, but if you could discuss a little bit what the need is for the extra half-time person as you're conceptually looking at that. If you could talk about what the $250,000 operations transfer is in the last line here. And then chat for a moment, if you can, about where our current wellness center and wellness program would they still be sustained in this vision? How that fits. If you will.
Mrs. Hiller, Deputy Mayor, in terms of converting that position from part-time to full-time, looking back, it was full-time, not just a couple years ago, I believe. And so that's sort of what's old is new again, so to speak. But in terms of the comments Mr. Colson made earlier, there are some things we do well, and this probably isn't one of them. Moving forward with a new full-time position, I think will allow us to really get that person to focus, bring in a new perspective, and drive us forward from that perspective. And I think that person being able to devote 40 hours a week plus to those duties, I think will really bring some value to the organization.
So if I may, this would be half in the group health insurance fund and half in HR. Is that where the other half of the person is?
Yeah, it's half in the health insurance fund and half out of the general fund, yes.
Thank you. Then the $250,000?
Yes, thank you. The $250,000, again, as Mrs. Lee spoke of earlier, is what we would call a placeholder. That's an amount we believe will be sufficient to do whatever remodel or purchase might be necessary to pursue the clinic piece.
So this is physical plan.
Physical plan, whether it's on-site or off-site, some sort of physical plan, placeholder.
Thank you. And then if you could talk for a moment about how the wellness program that we have now fits into this model. We've got a physical space, we've got people, we've got equipment.
Mr. Colson, did you want to answer that
Yeah,
question?
Deputy Mayor and Councilmember Hiller, a good question, a question we don't have the answer to. We understand that we have an asset, but until we get through all of the discussions, certainly it's still available for people while we're going through the decision-making process. But at the end of this, it may be incorporated, it may be displaced. We don't know. It's too premature to say.
Thank you. Thank you.
Is that okay?
Any other questions? Yes, Mrs. Morris.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just a kind of a follow-up, one of the things that we learned, and as I understand it, this is the case here also in Olathe, it was taken out of their health reserve fund. So in other words, it was what the premiums the city and the employees had paid into. There's enough in there to cover that rather than having to ask for new money. Is that correct?
Yes, if you look at the expenditure totals overall, we felt we were able to absorb these costs, not only because we've got a cash balance in our reserves, but also if you look at the premium line there is 53203, that's where our claims hit. And for the past couple of years, those have been going down. So in 15, we felt comfortable bringing that budget down, which basically absorbed all the costs that are startup costs along with this proposed wellness center.
Thank you.
Okay, any other questions or comments? I don't see any.
Are you ready to move on to the next item?
Yes.
All right. That would be item number 4, which is actually item number 5. So with your permission, Deputy Mayor, I'll go ahead and jump into that.
Yes, you're talking about the when we skipped past.
Yes, discussing the change to a cash-based budgeting, and then that'll flow us into the utility funds, I believe. As I mentioned earlier, oftentimes I am overly succinct when I explain things. This is a case where I want to take some time and make sure we all have a good basis of understanding for this and make sure that you're comfortable with the direction that we're proceeding with this. Because this is a significant impact to the budget this year, we want to make sure you have a high comfort level with it. So with that in mind, I'd like to first start with turning to page 15 in your budget book. And I don't normally like to read to folks because we can all read, but I will read this because I think it really illustrates what we're trying to do here. Our prior City of Topeka budgets have been based on an accounting method that incorporates applications of generally accepted accounting principles. We are joining municipalities across the state of Kansas that utilize cash basis for budgeting. So the first thing I'd like to emphasize with this change, moving from cash to fund balance, is that we are joining other cities across the state in doing this according to state law. So I don't think that can be overemphasized enough, that this is a move in the right direction for that reason. Secondarily, it really helps us distinguish between budgeting and accounting. We sometimes use those terms interchangeably, but really they're very different things. The budget is our cash expenditures and revenues throughout the year. Accounting is how we account for those things. And I know you're not supposed to use a word to define a word, but that's really the best way to do it in my estimation. So again, I think that difference also needs to be emphasized. I'd like to walk through just a couple of changes that you'll see and the way it will impact the budget, and then we'll move into the utility funds, and that'll give some illustrations and help those of us who are visual learners maybe see what I'm trying to verbally get across here. The first difference you'll see is in the cash versus fund balance. We have previously talked about fund balance as if it meant cash balance, but our budgets have used fund balance to mean exactly what it means, and that is fund balance. That is those assets available to the fund. Moving forward, we want to emphasize that our budgets will emphasize a cash balance. Previously, the fund balance included things like assets of the water plant. And so, for example, previously when you looked at, say, the water plant fund balance, it was in excess of $100 million. Okay, they don't have $100 million in cash laying around, we don't think. And so, unless the water plant is for sale right now, that's really not an accurate representation of our cash position. Now, I'm sure everybody understands this, but an example that Brandon Kaufman likes to use is in our own personal home checkbooks. It would be like including the value of our house in our cash assets as if we had that money to spend. We don't. As a city, we're no different, and so we need to reflect that accurately. The second major change you'll see throughout the budget, particularly in the utility funds, is capital assets are treated as expenditures. Previously, they were not, and so those weren't recognized in the budget, and they should have been. And the final major difference you'll notice between the cash basis and the GAAP basis of budgeting is that debt service payments, principal payments are included in this budget. Again, previously those were not recognized in the budget, and so that gave a less than accurate picture of where we were in terms of those payments. Additionally, I understand it's always been a debate within this body about what we do with depreciation, and I don't know if the former mayor's here, but I've been led to believe that was one of his major issues. We shouldn't address depreciation within the budget because we don't spend money on it. It is what it is, but it's not a cash expenditure, and so that shouldn't be reflected in the budget. So are there any questions about those particular changes or how it might impact the budget from what I've said?
Yes, Mr. Harmon.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. I don't have a question, Doug, but I just want to commend you and the staff for moving from the GAAP method of budgeting to the cash basis. It makes more sense. It's easier for us to understand. We're not accountants. I'm not. And it just makes more sense to think in terms of cash rather than a budget built on, albeit sound accounting principles. The cash basis just makes more sense. And you're right, Mayor Bunton, bless his heart, every year he'd seen the budget book, the line items for depreciation. He couldn't understand why they were in there, and we would spend hours, trying to understand why it was in there, and because in our minds, I think we were thinking of it as cash, and it was not cash. So, based on previous years going through budgets, I think this is a much better approach. It just makes sense because that's really what we're talking about: is how much cash we take in and how much cash do we do we spend in providing goods and services to the citizens of Topeka. So I fully support it. I think it's a step in the right direction. I commend you for undertaking the difficulty of transitioning from the gap method to the cash basis. Thank you very much.
Any other comments or questions? Mr. Coulson?
Deputy Mayor, I actually just want to ask Mr. Gerber to really, so our concern with that is it makes it look like the budget jumps up substantially. That, you know, we've been so focused on maintaining budget, lowering costs and everything. This activity, while it's right and it doesn't really cost us more money, it doesn't really reflect an increase in cost. It looks so. So maybe Doug, if you could explain that. Now that I've totally confused it.
No, Mr. Coulson, Deputy Mayor, thank you. And that was certainly the next step in this process, is to kind of talk through what's detailed there at the bottom of the page. If you look budget-wide, it appears as if the budget's gone up a significant amount. But in reality, what we are doing is merely reflecting the actual amounts that we have already been spending. They just haven't been in the budget. But it does appear, particularly across the three utility funds, as if expenditures are up $12 million. And that's not accurate at all. Again, the budget is just simply reflecting what has been being spent.
I appreciate that. In fact, as you explained this to me previously and again tonight, I mean, this is far more transparent for even, you know, any of our constituents or the folks out there trying to figure out what we actually have or what we've actually been spending our dollars on. So I guess I join Mr. Harmon in saying this, I really like this approach and I appreciate it. Does anybody else have a comment or question? Yes, Mrs. Hiller.
I too chime in. I think this is just a great move, and I know it was a lot of work. Just for a moment, for us to think ahead, you have some responsibilities at some point to reflect that gap style accounting. Will we see that only in the audit if we want to look at it, or will we see that along the way in financial reports?
Councilmember Hiller and Deputy Mayor, we'll continue our practice of auditing and accounting for things under a GAAP basis, following generally accepted accounting principles. We will simply be budgeting on a cash basis.
If I can follow up then, one thing that's helpful is to be able to look at a monthly financial report and have it tie in with the budget. Will those monthly financial reports tie in with this cash budget then?
I may ask Mr. Kaufman to come up and explain how the financial reports will tie into the budget.
Deputy Mayor and Councilmember Hiller, since this is a structural change, I mean, we currently are producing monthly reports, what I'd say based more on a GAAP basis. So it will take some structural changes in between now and implementation of January 1st, 2015, in how we are basically booking those. So we're gonna have to figure out some way to book them separately, basically from the cash basis bookings. So there's gonna be some process and there will be an implementation time, but by January 1st, 2015, we're hoping to have that going so that on a monthly, quarterly basis, we can produce cash basis statements. And looking forward to the future, maybe we'd like to structure it so that we could produce GAAP-based statements also on a quarterly basis if needed. Some cities have requirements and bond covenants that they produce GAAP-based statements. We do not at this time, but I think it'd be important to structure it in case that ever occurred.
Thank you. I hope, I know there would be a transition. I know at the nonprofit level, when I managed, we simply did the modified, what you're proposing here, and simply at year end did the conversion for whatever official records we needed, and that way our monthly statements did match the budget. I certainly hope, with as much as obviously you're hearing, we like this conversion, that we we can match up the financials to the budget. So was hoping for just a short yes on that. Sounds like we'll get there.
Yeah.
All right, thank you. Thank you.
Any other questions or comments? I don't see any, so if you want to keep going.
I wanted to really highlight one of the things you said, Deputy Mayor, and this does indeed move us towards more transparency in our budget. And as was also mentioned by Councilmember Harmon, it just helps us all to talk the same language. We talk in terms of cash, and so this allows us to look in the budget and know that we're accurately seeing what cash is available. Plus, we like a challenge, and so that was the side benefit.
Right.
So practically speaking, I think this really takes us to the utility budget. So with your permission, I'd like to move to page 114 so we can illustrate a couple of examples of how this might impact the budget in a visual sense.